overview and a complete review on the Fuji X100T. Also mostly applicable to the earlier model, the X100S. Here I have my little handmade neck strap on the Fuji X100T. I love making my own stuff. Definitely a DIY photographer for sure. I love taking stuff apart and making my own stuff. I used to own a couple Leica film cameras back in the day. Leica film cameras are excellent. The conclusion of most everybody was that Leica was way too late to give up film. They were kind of like the heroin addict that couldn't get off the product, i.e. film. And they waited too late, and snooze lose, as they say. They say that nature abhors a vacuum, and if you don't adapt, then you're going to become extinct, like the dodo bird. This is what Leica would wish that they actually made, and now I know why. And I've had a few people ask me that. It's like, well, why were you, you've got a Fuji X-T1, and you have an X Pro 2, and the X-T2 is coming out. Why would you buy this camera with a fixed lens? And I'll give you a really short answer. And that is that the people that actually appreciate hardcore simplex street cameras like Leica used to be, but want that in a modern product that Leica does not provide. They do not provide this product or anything close to this product. They don't, and it costs many, many thousands of dollars more than this. If they're both the same price, I would not even consider a Leica. The easiest thing that I could tell you, and then that'll make you wake up, is about, I remember a few days ago when I told you in a video, when you have a photo show, you'll have all the noobs and people heading towards the new cameras and the new lenses, and then you have the pros straddle in and they go towards the lighting equipment. It's like, oh my god, check out that new strobe, or check out that new beauty dish. That's the stuff that they're interested in, because that's the stuff that makes them the money. Because you can do a whole lot more with a cheap camera and lens and one good piece of professional studio lighting, like a beauty dish and a strobe, than you can with the most expensive Zeiss lens and the best camera that money can buy. I mean, that's just, you're not even going to argue with me, because you can't. And the people that actually own this camera, they've been around the block. I should have bought this camera earlier. I knew I wanted this camera. I've been too busy, buying everything else in the world, testing, whatnot. But I knew that I wanted this camera, and I've shot the leaf shutter before in medium format. I mean, I know the advantages of a leaf shutter. I've appreciated this camera a whole lot more since getting it. I've got maybe now, I don't know, a few dozen hours on the X100T. I'd borrowed one many months ago, and I knew I wanted it immediately, but there was just priorities. But I held off too long. Now, a few people have asked me about the autofocus tracking. And you don't buy like you don't buy a Rolls Royce for how it's going to handle around a racetrack. It's just, that's not it. The autofocus tracking, continuous autofocus tracking on the Fuji X100T, I would actually say is existentially continuous. I don't know, about 5% worse than the Fuji X-T1, but it is not made for that. This camera is not made for that. You can get much better autofocus tracking if you switch to electronic viewfinder as opposed to optical viewfinder, and if you actually learn how to shape your autofocus area. A lot of people forget that. They just leave it in one place and they wonder why their autofocus is like, oh well, you need to do a little bit of confinement on your autofocus area. But also, if you're going to do any close-up work, you should switch to electronic viewfinder instead of optical viewfinder. The focus peaking on this is absolutely excellent. It's excellent. It's been a dream to use. The low light autofocusing on this camera is not wonderful, and the people that love this camera will tell you that. This camera is not made for that. This camera is spectacular and beloved and owned by so many people that I actually do respect. People that I know that are real shooters. not YouTube gearheads, and I do a lot of gear reviews, but I'm talking about YouTube gearheads. They get sent something to test for a week, and they've only been into photography for a few years, and sorry, I'm sorry. I don't care if you think that's a slant, but I mean, I really don't have much respect, not for the person, but for these people that are, just the gearheads. And I do a lot of gear reviews, so that doesn't mean I'm a gearhead. I mean, the stuff that gets me excited the most is lighting equipment and true strobist. I mean, obviously, I'm making hundreds of one-of-a-kind light mods, and I'm always talking about lighting and reflectors. So, I mean, I know what's important, and this camera really is that as far as a piece of camera gear. With this also, since you have true high-speed sync with the leaf shutter, you're actually able to get a lot more out of your speed light or your studio strobe, because regular high-speed sync is pulsed light and your power drops off significantly. That's an issue of charging and draining the capacitors extremely fast, because the speed light and normal high-speed sync, like on a Canon and a Nikon, is it's pulsing the light, whereas with a leaf shutter you're actually getting a full blast of light. Now there is an issue, depending on which speed light you use or which studio strobe, it's a T1 or T5 time. In other words, if you got 4,000th of a second, but your pulse of light is 1/1000th of a second, then your actual shutter is only sampling a spectrum of that full blast of light. And that's a question people have asked me about the Fuji X100T. It's like, well, depending on the light and depending on the power output, the T1 time for most speed lights is right at all the way open at f2 and 1/1000th of a second. That doesn't mean you can't use 1/4000th of a second. It means if you shoot that, you'll notice that, wow, it looks exactly the same. And it looks the same because the pulse of that light is complete. It's because kind of how you can't shove a cow through the eye of a needle. The cow is only going to go through a hole the size of a cow, and that's the way it works. It will sync at any speed, this is undeniable, but depending on what lighting you use, if the pulse of that light is this big, and your shutter speed is this big, 1/4000th, 1/2000th of a second, then only this much of that much light is going to get through. That's really simple to understand. But yes, this will sync at any speed. And what is orgasmic, and people don't understand, I've got so many studio strobes, these are IGBT controlled studio. I love the hell out of Pulse buff, but these are not high-speed sync tools. They don't work that way, and they certainly don't work that way with shutter plane, shutter focal plane shutters, where you have a moving slit. It's just the pulse of light time of the sensor that is being revealed by first curtain and second curtain as it's passing. Can't work. It's not going to work. With this, it works on all my studio strobes, and that is spectacular. And then when someone next is going to say, as I've heard, well, it's a 23mm lens. How good is it? Well, it's a 35mm equivalent. Well, let's get nitty-gritty here. 80% of professional hardcore photographers, people that I actually, trust, not people that's like, well, I've got, I got a gear channel on YouTube and it's ranked top 10. No, that doesn't mean you really know anything about photography. That just means you've got a lot of production values, and you got a lot of frou-frou and glitter, and you're throwing glitter in people's faces. I mean real photographers. If they were stranded on a desert island, it's like, you can have a Nikon or a Canon, but only one lens. They'll say, well, 35mm. And that's what this is. This is a 35mm. Is it a fixed lens? Yeah, it is. But it's the fixed lens that, if you could only have one lens, and I wouldn't answer the same way. It's like, well, if you had your Nikon and one lens only, what would it be? Well, it would be my Nikon and like my 35mm f2 Zeiss, because that's the best lens in the world. It's the best lens I've ever used, period, and I have a couple of them. So that's not an issue either. Now, what people don't understand about this is about dynamic range and crushing ambient light. Not only is this thing made in Japan and is made like a brick outhouse, it's just tougher than woodpecker lips. The design, the ergonomics on it are exquisite, divine, sublime, silk, sex, and sugar. This camera is just literally the tits. It's not cheap either. It's $1,200. Usually you can find them like used for $9.50, or you can get a cheaper Fuji X100S. But crushing the sun, I mean, this camera is a sun crusher, and your camera ain't a sun crusher. People don't understand the magic of a leaf shutter. They just don't. You're able to overpower the sun so much more easily while keeping your aperture open. I'm going to open up at f2 and I'm going to stay there. Keeping your aperture open, to have a distinct shallow depth of field. Unlike other things which are not true high-speed sync, not only are they not true high-speed sync, but you have to have all these fancy BS. Well, I got to have an ITTL trigger here, and I got to stand on my forehead and pray to the sun. No, there's all these little stupid gadget BS things you have to get for not true high-speed sync photography with other cameras, and that's pulsed light. And when it's pulsed, capacitors can only charge and discharge at a certain rate, and so this is why people ask me, it's like, when I'm doing high-speed sync with my Nikon, the power output is a lot less. It's like, yeah, you're right, it is. Like full blast on high-speed sync with a Nikon at, say, 1/4000th of a second, I mean, the flash is going really fast, faster than you can see it. But it's not that much power, because that's the only way it can work. With this, that's not the case. Like with these strobes, like at 640 watt seconds, even at 1/4000th of a second, this studio strobe, oh my God, at 1/7000th of a second, which at my max shutter speed here at 1/4000th, at 1/7000th of a second, which is much smaller than 1/4, it will put out some hardcore lighting. So basically, let me work this out here. This 640 watt Einstein, for example, is equivalent to a 2000 watt second. Now, let me repeat that for you. When I'm using the leaf shutter on this sucker, at any shutter speed, because of the way that works and the pulse time involved, this 640 watt second studio strobe is the equivalent of what a 2000 watt second studio strobe can do, because of the leaf shutter and the way it lets in that fast burst of light, especially from the Einstein unit here, or even the Digibee, the new Digibee. That is some hardcore. It's like, you step over there down the street, and I'm just going to, it's like, wow, I can do that with this. That's pretty amazing. You don't need any fancy BS triggers. I'm going to use a speed light with this thing. I can actually trigger it with, use this in commander mode, turn on this dinky little flash on the Fuji X100T, and just use like a SB800 or 900 with an optical slave and power it. People were asking me and says, well, like those little flash Q triggers, they say only 1/250th of a second to max sync speed. But that's not an issue either with this. Because I've been shooting at 1/4000th of a second for days and days and days of those little flash Q triggers. I know the website says 1/250th of a second, but they're talking about regular cameras. This is not a regular camera. So even the dumbest, cheapest old crud, for as long as it triggers that flash, it will work with this at 4,000th of a second. Now, your shutter speed and your pulse of light duration have to be within each other, but the point is it'll still sync at that speed. The other super serious advantage, especially for street photography, is the fact that the leaf shutter is super, super, super quiet and stealthy. It's nothing. It's very stealthy. I said you'll sync at any speed and here's the important point, and this is orgasmic to people that are hardcore professional photographers. To them, when I say this is literally photograph. Excuse me for saying this, but it kind of has to be said, and other people won't get it until they really understand it. To a professional photographer that knows about lighting and the issues associated with it, this is like photographic pornography, like XXX. And the fact is, with this camera, the X100T, with the built-in 3-stop ND filter that you can turn on or off, lets you drop the ambient light but stay wide open at f2, and then add this unmolested light that is not pulse but just regular normal strobe or speed light illumination. And that is just, oh, it's that kind of moment. Other people say, well, I don't get it. You're right. Well, you may not get it, but all the other people, the pros out there that have this camera, they do get it, and they, and that's why I've been wanting it, and I've been holding off on getting it, but I mean, I finally got it. By castrated light, I mean flashed light that is actually pulsed for high-speed sync, but this is not high-speed sync. This is true or real high-speed sync. Pulse light is not real high-speed sync. This is real high-speed sync with the leaf shutter. So this lets you, for example, make any nasty lighting, 12 noon, 2 p.m., mostly appear how you want it, except for like an orange cast, but you could add that with a gel filter. It makes you make it appear how you want it. So you have total dominance over the ambient light and subject illumination. And this gives you hardcore dynamic range compression power. It's like, well, I want to take a picture of Jim Bob with the sun over her, Sally Sue with the sun over her shoulder, but I want to shoot it at f2, but I can't do that. It's just too much dynamic range. No, I'm going to turn on the ND filter on this thing. I'm going to dial it up to 2,000th of a second. I am going to crush the ambient light to where I want it, and then I'm going to add the illumination to my subject, and it's like, bam. You got it, and you can't do it with your crap. You can't. Well, you can if you have a lot of gadgets and you have the proper lighting, and Studio Strobe ain't going to do it. Because this stuff, this unit, not the IGBT controlled units, they're not going to put out high-speed sync illumination, but they will on this. So there's no hoops to jump through. It's literally, I turn this on. Even if I just wanted to use the dinky little flash on this camera, I turn on the ND filter, turn on the dinky little flash on the X100T here, and I've crushed the ambient illumination. I've raised up the subject illumination. I've taken what is horrible dynamic range, just horrible. I got a person in shadow here, and I have this strong light beating over the shoulder. Wow! I've got nothing here, and I've got everything here. And what I do is I drop this down, and I raise this up, and that means my dynamic range has gone from whoa and whoa to here and here. And what that does is it means when you pop it in Lightroom, you don't have much to screw with. It's just like easy greasy, easy peasy. And that is why this is the tits. And I've been enjoying it so much. This is going to be my go-to camera now. And I'm probably going to get rid of my X Pro 2 because the XT2 is coming out. And it's going to be sports action, super fast autofocus. But this is going to be my, there's no leaf shutter on the X Pro 2. There's no, turn on, turn off 3-stop ND filter on the X Pro 2 either. But I knew that, but I'm probably going to get rid of my X Pro 2, not because it's not a wonderful camera, but this is going to be my go-to. It's like, well, this doesn't have interchangeable lenses like the S Pro. It's 35 millimeter, If it's the one lens that I could only have one lens, it is the one lens I have. And this is why this is such a wonderful camera. And the people that get it, and the people that don't, I mean, they may not get it. But I can tell you one thing for sure. There is a hardcore pile of reasons why the hardcore shooters, the people that have been around the block and around the block again and again, there's a reason why they own this damn camera. And you might want to ask yourself if, I just got done telling you really, but it's like, yeah, there might be, they might own this camera for a pile of good reasons. Thank you for watching. That is my review of the X100T Fujifilm. Catch you later.